Hey everybody, and welcome back. I'm Dr. Butler, the MD Investor, and this is the MD Investor Podcast. So this is episode 2, and again, if you were here last time when we had this episode, then you know that with the first episode, we talked about some of the financial mistakes that doctors make, and we also talked about some of the top 10 reasons why doctors are making mistakes with their money. In this episode, we want to talk about more about the mistakes that doctors are making once they're graduating. And this is something that I talk about a lot only because it's reality. It's something that I've dealt with. It's something that a lot of people deal with. So some of the top reasons that doctors are making so many mistakes and why doctors are broke. So a lot of people in society think that doctors are wealthy. And the issue with that is that we buy into the same hype. So I got an article that I saw, and it was pretty awesome because it talks about some of the things that I personally went through as well. And even though there's some points I agree with and some points I disagree with, I just wanted to talk about the article because, again, doctors still have this mentality that once I graduate, I'm going to become famous, or once I graduate, I'm going to have money, or I'm going to have prestige. But in reality, being a doctor is like having any other job. So whether you're a bank teller, whether you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, whether you're a police officer, whether you're a shoe salesman, it doesn't matter. A job or a salary is just a fixed form of income. And if you don't know what to do with your income, it doesn't matter how much you make. So Michael Jackson, billionaire, he died poor. Mike Tyson, again, hundreds of millions of dollars, currently poor. Like there's issues that keep on happening. Lindsay Lohan over her career, millions and millions of dollars, and again poor, because how you spend is a huge issue. Currently, even in the news, they're talking about Johnny Depp, right? He's huge actor, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and again now he's having issues with lawsuits and money because he has like erroneous spending habits. So that happens a lot, and it's not only to doctors, but I'm talking from a perspective that I know, which is being a doctor. So the article was talking about why are so many doctors broke? And I just thought that it was funny because it's reality. A lot of doctors feel like they're rich, and a lot of society think that doctors are rich. So it's kind of hard to have that stigma of being a doctor and being broke, or feeling like you want to share that information. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. Like even when I talk to friends of mine, they don't want to talk about not having money because it feels embarrassing, or it feels like, you know what, I am broke and I am struggling and I don't know why and I need help. That would be a very strong way to approach things. It'd be a very healthy way to approach things, because then whenever you have a problem, you can fix it. So kind of like when we deal with our patients, if a patient says, hey, my stomach hurts, it's easier for us to narrow down what we need to work on, and so we can fix it. We find out, oh, it's an appendicitis or it's a gallbladder issue. Then now we can really work on fixing that problem. But if no one wants to tell us what's wrong, if no one tells us what's going on, then how can we adjust it and how can we fix it? So the issue here that we have in reality is that there's a perception of how much people make in the world. And the top 5 percentile in terms of careers is physicians. However, that's not reality in terms of how much real people make real money. So when I say real people making real money, I'm talking about the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Elon Musk, the Warren Buffetts. These are the people who are like the 0.1 percenters who are making the majority of the wealth in the world, like the Walton family, or these type of families who are making true long-lasting wealth. That's where real money is. And in this case, doctors are in the top 5%, but that's salary-based earning. So in terms of people earning a salary or making a wage or working a career for a living, being a doctor is a top-paying profession. However, compared to what we have to go through to get to that profession and what we have to go through to make money in that field, it is quite different to deal with. So now let's start talking about and going through some of the reasons why doctors coming out of medical school not coming out of medical school, but maybe coming out of residency, for example, are having issues with being broke. So some of the mistakes that they make here are, I would say the number one mistake, or even no particular order, one of the mistakes is acting wealthy like society tells you to. So for example, imagine you just finished your residency, your parents are proud of you, they're like, you're a doctor now and stuff like that. They expect you to look a certain way and act a certain way, or perform a certain way, or have certain kind of prestige around you. Maybe you increased your clothes, Maybe you increase the lifestyle that you have. You eat at better restaurants. You drive a nicer car. Maybe you were driving a Honda before and now you're driving a Mercedes Benz or a BMW or a Tesla. And that has to be reality too, because when I go to the hospital or whenever I'm at any kind of hospital setting, the parking lot is always full of Teslas and Porsches and BMWs and Mercedes. Like, people are buying all of these very expensive cars and they're just sitting in the parking lot most of the time, but it has that prestige to it. It seems like I'm a doctor, I'm doing well, and this is my proof. See, I have a nice house. See, I have nice clothes. See, I have a nice car. But the reality of it is that that's not you truly being wealthy. If you're not wealthy already, then it makes sense if you already have true wealth and you're buying these things because they're most likely toys at this point in time. But if you don't have true wealth, if you're not a true multimillionaire, then it's hard to act like a multimillionaire because now you're putting yourself in a box. And that's one of the huge mistakes that a lot of new attendings make. And I have a story about this because when I was finishing residency, I had a chief resident who was finishing that year as well. After he completed his chief residency, he got a position as a full-time hospitalist, and that position was paying about $300,000 a year. So $300,000 a year, that's great if you're going from $50,000 a year as a resident to $300,000 a year. That's a huge jump. You just, 3 times your money, 5x your money, whatever it may be. And the spending seemed to follow that immediately. He had way nicer clothes, like maybe a month after graduation. He's like already had a lot of nicer clothes. And the first thing he did was he bought a Maserati. Now, Maseratis are beautiful cars. They're very expensive, but he bought one right out the gate as his first car. So this is now his car that he's going back and forth to work to. And if you're making $300,000 a year, it takes you a year to make $300,000. That's countless hours at the hospital. So I don't know if you're working 7 on, 7 off. Maybe you're working 10 days, 12 days, 13 days, maybe even up to 18 shifts, 19 shifts, 20 shifts a month. In this case, he was working so much with this program, getting everything off the ground and everything like that. And then this car was about half of his salary. That's a huge ratio. So in this case, sometimes there's ratios to how you should be budgeting. So if you're budgeting, like, let's say an average ratio that you should have for your living expenses, maybe let's say 40% or less. You shouldn't be living in a situation where you're spending more than 40% of your earned income just on your living situation. So now think about this. That's not his living situation. That's just his vehicle. So if his vehicle is taking up 40% of his earned income already, you still have to factor in taxes, his housing situation, his insurance, all of these kind of things. And now all of a sudden he looks very wealthy, but he isn't very wealthy. And you end up having to work continuously to dig yourself out of these holes. And this is a problem that a lot of doctors are struggling with. So I would say that's in the top mistakes that doctors make when they're transitioning to becoming new doctors. This was also something that was covered in the article, and I thought that this was really funny, the way they phrased it. So doctors suffer with debt. A lot of doctors have debt because one is it's expensive to be a doctor. It's expensive to be in this field altogether. And they said doctors suffer from diabetic neuropathy. So not diabetes, not diabetic, but diabetic. So in this case, we're used to just kind of throwing everything on the pile, because it's like you go through school, they're like, hey, you owe us 100,000. You're like, throw it to the pile. You go through medical school, they're like, hey, you owe us another 100,000. You know us 200,000. You're like, just throw it on the pile. And then all of a sudden, it's time to get a house, and your debt to income ratio is terrible, but they have physician-based loans and things like that. So you're like, I need a house. Hey, we'll help you with your house. Here's the loan, here's the APR, here's the interest. You're like, great, throw it on the pile. Same with the car, same with everything else. Now all of a sudden, you're trapped in this loop where you're obligated to pay down the debt. And you're working and you're working and you're working just to actually keep up with this cycle. You're paying for your house, you're paying for your car, you're paying for the insurance for these things, your PMI if you have it or if you don't have it. You're paying for your lifestyle, your clothing, you're paying for your family. If some people have children, some people don't. Some people come in with full families, some people don't. So everyone's lifestyle is going to be a little bit different, and everyone's going to spend a little bit different. But if you're a doctor in training, you're always trained to borrow money, but you're never trained to actually create wealth. And that's with investing or borrowing to create wealth. And that's a huge, huge difference. So now this is where I have a discrepancy with the article itself. The article is telling you never to borrow unless you're buying a house. But in my case, I think borrowing is hugely important. Borrowing is where wealth is created because there is no income tax on borrowing. So in this case, whether or not you're borrowing for personal things, that's where I have a discrepancy at. Is creating debt for liabilities is always going to be a terrible thing if the liability has no form of becoming an asset for you. So what I mean from this part is, let's say you borrow to buy a car. That car is sitting in the driveway 80% of the time. You drive it to work, you drive it back, you drive it to work, you drive it back. When people see it, they go, oh, that's an amazing car. You feel good. You feel like the boss. You feel like this big honcho, and you have this beautiful car. It's fast. It's fun to drive. But most of the time, that car's not really doing much for you, okay? It's just sitting. So for myself, I have a car and it just sits there. Like, it literally always sits there. Unless I'm working or going on an errand or something, it just sits there. There's nothing that I'm doing with the car. It's just a car. However, that is costing you money. So if you have a car and it's costing you money and it's not doing anything for you, you're spending $1,000 a month on a car note, or you're spending $300, $400 a month on insurance for that car note. Now you're up to $1,200, $1,300 for a car. Maybe you have a very nice Tesla or a Porsche or a Maserati in this case, and you're spending $2,000 a month. Now that $2,000 a month starts to add up, especially when you fall into hard times or you have an emergency pop up or whatever it may be. But in this case, you have this sense of being always in debt. And that indebtedness is making it so you're stuck in the world. And I don't want people to feel stuck in the world. We want to eliminate debt, or what I'd like to think is have debt that's working for you. So now let's say, for example, in real estate, if you borrowed $100,000 from the bank, you put $20,000 down because you bought a property, you're still in debt. That's debt. However, other people are paying that debt for you, so it's good debt. There's always good debt and there's always bad debt. There's always good things and there's bad things, no matter what it is. There's good investments, there's bad investments. If you have debt working in your favor, it's always going to be preferable to having debt that helps you for show. So like buying a purse, if you're selling purses at an exorbitant amount or you're holding them for resale value, that's perfect. Some people love watches. Like, watches are great. I love watches. So if you buy a Rolex for $5,000 and it's, or 5, 10, 20, however much the Rolex costs, and then all of a sudden there's a increase in demand in that commodity, and then now you're selling it for a profit, great. That makes sense. It is a reason to do it because that investment is being returned to you. So if you bought a watch for $5,000 and you sell it for 20 because there's a shortage of those watches, you just made a profit. That makes sense. Your indebtedness can make sense for you. But a lot of people don't do that to make profit. A lot of people do it for show. And it's the for show that keeps us in that little diabetic or diabetic little cycle that we get stuck into. The other thing is that they brought up in this article, a reason that doctors are struggling, which is also very true and not true at the same time, is that we suffer, doctors in general, or a lot of high professional careers suffer with delayed gratification skills. Now, this is true and false. The reason it's false is because it takes a long time to be a doctor. So if you committed to being a doctor while you were a kid, or if you committed to being a doctor while you were in high school, you had to wait years and years and years to accomplish that goal, which means that it was delayed gratification, which means that you had to wait to get to that goal. You put in all the work constantly. That's delayed gratification. However, the issue happens is once you transition from being a resident to being an attending, that skill set disappears. That's where I believe this comes into play. Delayed gratification still has to be practiced. You still have to actually continue to work until you get to a stage where your wealth is truly built, or you truly have a system to where you can save your wealth, protect your wealth, and be able to pass it on. Because at the end of the day, which I tell a lot of people, you can't pass on being a doctor. You can pass on a business, you can pass on wealth, you can pass on stocks, you can pass on investments, you can pass on a lot of things in life, but you can never pass on the skill set of being a doctor. Now, a lot of people's families, they'll have like, oh, my dad's a doctor, my grandpa was a doctor. That is a legacy-based career path, but I can't just make my child a doctor because I want them to be a doctor. That's impossible. They still have to go through the processes. They still have to work. They still have to do whatever it takes in order to fulfill that role, to build that career. Same thing with police officers or firefighters or nurses. Just because you're a nurse, your daughter can't automatically be a nurse. Never works like that. However, if you own property and you set it up to where when you pass away, they will own property, that's a huge difference. That's fantastic, right? That's what we're looking for. That's the kind of moneymaker that we want to have. And sometimes when we want the pleasure of now, we lose all of the delayed gratification skill set. Those skills go completely out the window because it's like, I've been working. I'm finally a doctor. I'm getting that nice car. I'm getting that nice watch. I'm getting that nice house. And when you get into that setting of no longer wanting that delayed gratification, or taking the time or taking the years that it takes to actually build a system that it continue to perpetuate, whether you're working or not, that's when we fall into traps. So that delayed gratification is a huge deal. The next one is also funny because I mentioned it before, but this one is doctors spend a ton of money on cars. I have to agree with this in the article because doctors pour money into vehicles. It is a huge weakness for a lot of physicians. It usually prides males a lot more than females, but still, just in general, high-level professionals usually want a certain prestige. So whether it's basketball players, football players, doctors, lawyers, engineers, sometimes we all fall into the category of we want to look as successful as we are. So to become a doctor, you have to spend years and years of time. To become any of these high professional careers, even if you're a police officer or you're a firefighter or you're a nurse, you have to put in time. And all of this time means that when your friends were out working and they were building their ways up and things like that, like sometimes your friends might have more money or be ahead of you and you feel like, I'm behind. And if you're behind, when it's time for you to finally be in that realm, now you want to play catch up. And in order to play catch up, you spend more than you have, or you do more than you have. And then especially in cars, like adults love cars. You're like, oh, look at that BMW. It's so beautiful. Or look at that brand new S-Class Mercedes, right? Like you guys might be skipping past the C-Class. Or you might be like pro-environment and hate gas. And you're like, Mercedes, pish posh. I want that Tesla. I want that electric drive itself fancy boy, right? So in that case, you might be loving something in that realm, and those cost money, right? Like even some of the base models of like a Tesla X and stuff like that, they might get into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you don't just want the base model, right? You're fancy. You're a doctor. You want the decked out one. You want the one that has like the 3 rows and the panoramic windows and the ones that fully drive itself. And those things start to add up really quick. Now all of a sudden you're paying that extra $2,000, $3,000. But it's okay because you're working. And because you're working, you have to keep working. And because you have to keep working, you start feeling like you're overworked. But the thing is, these are like the prison walls that you built around yourself to keep up with the Joneses. And these are the things that you've created in your own life. And now all of a sudden it becomes a little bit of a trap. And I don't want people to feel trapped. I know that I felt trapped. I felt like I was putting everything into this and I wasn't really getting what I wanted out of it. And that took a lot of effort and willpower to change how I was feeling about it. And I had to make huge changes. Same thing with housing. So the next thing that we talked about was one was cars, one was how you spend and looking wealthy and stuff like that. And the same thing happens with houses. A lot of physicians I know have very nice houses. And I didn't fall into that category right away. I had a very basic home. And the reason I chose a basic home was because I just needed it to serve a purpose. I needed it to be a house where I know that whenever I bought a house, it wasn't my dream house. Why? Because no one can create what I wanted in my dreams. I had to have it built from scratch. So my house was like, I want this, 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 and this, and this. No house exists like that because it's only in my imagination and it's only in my dreams. So in this case, I wanted a megastar mansion that no one on the planet has because that's how I think. But coming out of residency, I couldn't just go buy a mega mansion. That's not going to be possible. I don't have the money for that. But a lot of physicians try. Why? Because sometimes they give you a debt to income ratio approval that they don't do for a lot of people. But physicians are one group of career people who have the ability to get loans that ignore their debt to income ratio, because people know that the return on your investment for the amount of debt that you create is way different than most people. So for example, you can go to school in art and it might cost you $30,000 to get an art degree, but you may or may not find a job within your career field or even associated with that field. However, doctors are very particular. Even nurses and even lawyers are very particular. It's like, as a doctor, I'm going to spend $200,000 to go to school, but I can make that very easily back. And because people know how this process works, they're more than happy to loan to you and lend to you. Oh, you need a credit card? Here's a very high-end credit card. Here's a very high-end house. No, don't even worry about the loans. Don't worry about that. We got you covered. Why? Because doctors are golden tickets for other people. And a lot of people don't realize that. Doctors are meal plans for other people. Why? Because you have to pay the DEA every single time you want to get your DEA renewed. So you're constantly paying. And that's funny because the pharmaceutical companies are working a little bit different than we're working, but you're paying to give pharmaceuticals to other people to help them in what they're doing. Yet you're a golden ticket for them because every physician who's ever prescribed any type of opioids or narcotics or whatever it may be has to have a DEA. You have to pay for your board exams. So whenever you're taking your board exams, you're a continual source of income for other people who work around physicians but are not physicians. You see how that works? So you end up being their meal ticket. So in this case, people are very happy to loan to you. People are very happy to give you whatever you want because they know that they can actually get their money in return and that you're going to be good for it. Yeah, sure, I'll give you a house, doctor. No worries at all. I know that you're making $180,000 a year. So in this case, why not give you a $600,000 house? Or why not give you a $100,000 car? You'll make it back eventually and I'll make all the interest. So in this case, houses, cars, mansions, things like that. Doctors are living for today and not living for tomorrow, and they're enjoying life today and not really planning for tomorrow, so they end up being trapped today because they can't actually build and buy the freedom that they're really looking for. And one of the other huge mistakes that doctors make, and this is going to be the final one that we talk on, is doctors don't plan for the future properly. And what I mean by that is sometimes you'll take a job, you'll take a salary, and they'll say, hey, we match 401k up to 4% or whatever it is. And you think that your future is safe and secure in someone else's hands. Or you'll get a financial advisor or whatever it may be. Some people do, some people don't. But in this case, because we're getting money and we're getting a large percent of money sometimes, we think that the money will always be there. And people who plan for money to always be there are planning to fail. That's just like we were talking about Michael Jackson or Mike Tyson, things like this where people were spending ludicrous amounts of money. I seen a documentary once on Michael Jackson and he was like, he got a record contract for over $1 billion, $1 billion with a B. Like that's a huge, huge number. You imagine getting $1 billion, he'd go on shopping sprees and spend $10 million in a single minute. Like it was ridiculous. So he was over splurging because he's like, oh, that's one record deal. I'll have other record deals. So in this case, his spending was greatly, greatly exaggerated and he wasn't really paying attention to his future. In this case, he could have put money aside and never had to worry about working again in his life if he just invested that. He could have invested it in real estate. He could have invested it in the market and mutual funds. He could have invested it to where he was buying stocks that are paying him dividends for years and years to come. So his kids and grandkids and great-great-great-grandchildren would have money to live on without any effort needed whatsoever. But he didn't do that. So there are families who do protect their wealth properly. So think about families that are in Forbes and they've stayed in Forbes, like the Walton family, the Disney family. Families that are there on the top 10 in Forbes and they've been there for a long time, decades and decades, because they insulated themselves and they structured themselves. Every business should revolve around your last name and who you are in terms of your family, and not just what you can provide for them today, but what can you provide for them tomorrow? And will things change if you're not here anymore? So in this case, if you're not here for the future, can you still provide the exact same way as if you were here? Like, I want my great grandchildren, children who will never meet me, to still know who I am and know that the shade that they live in is still provided for by me, because the work that I put in, the sweat that I put in, the effort that I put in is meant for my family, for their legacy, and for their generation. And a lot of doctors don't plan for the future like that. But in this case, you have to be able to live today, enjoy today, but plan for years and years in advance. And I really hope that resonates with someone and someone thinks about that. And I really hope you guys continue to come back. I love having these talks and these discussions. I know it can be a little bit weird having a one-sided conversation, but I'm hoping that these conversations are things that get the thought process going, that plant a seed for you that will grow and flourish into you creating and building your own wealth. And you're always free to go to themdinvestor.com and you can reach out to me and I can actually work with you directly and help you get to where you want to get in life and plan your future and plan your goals and invest in yourself. All right, man, it's been great. I will see you guys in the next episode. Take care.